I was doing classical exclusively until I was about 12 and 12 and a half. Around that time, my mother started dating a jazz musician who was a drummer. And he heard me play some Beethoven one night. He was from Philly. I'm from Camden, New Jersey. And Philly's like 15 minutes away, right across the bridge. And so he said, you need to get that boy some jazz lessons. And so at that time I was only studying like synthesizer type funk stuff. And he turned us on to a local legend named Gerald Price, jazz pianist. This drummer's name, by the way, is David Gibson. And he turned us on to Gerald Price. And that was my introduction into the world of swinging. Excuse me, Mr. Price, he had a gold tooth, and he had like a salt and pepper afro kind of thing with a part in it. You know, old school, and he had like he was big built, but then he had like a little bit of a gut too. And he always wear those Nike sweatsuits, like those kind of old school sweatsuits that you see in the retro movies these days. And he had a very deep voice. Everybody calls me Ricky, where I'm from, my family. And so he's like, hello, Ricky. Oh, yes. He was like that. And he was able to reach a huge interval in his left hand. And so he started teaching me how to, stretch my left hand out and, reach large intervals. And he was a person who really was a fan of Earl Garner, rhythm piano player. And
did he smash your hand to do that?
I almost wanted him to, but he taught me a lot about showmanship too. He taught me to also enjoy. He taught me to always be good to the singers, because the singers would keep the piano players working, and stuff like that. So it was a great experience with him. But the problem was though that my classical teacher, Charles Engel, over at the Settlement Music School, and it was a school that I went to while I was going to high school and junior high. I had a scholarship there, and he really didn't like the fact that I was taking jazz lessons, because he was grooming me for the Mozart competition and all this stuff. Because I was, whenever I was a blazing little classical piano player until I started getting the jazz, and then I couldn't see the point of practicing the same song for a year to get it ready for the competition and all that stuff. I just was like, my heart's over here now. My heart was stolen, and so he was really salty. He's probably still salty about that, But
so you never did the competition?
No, I never did the competition. Because classical music is tough. If it's exact, so you have to know that stuff like the back of your hand, the back of your hand. So and be relaxed so that you can just go ahead and get to the expression of it. Similar to jazz, except that in jazz I still control what I play when I want to play it. Whereas in classical music, if the song starts with the most difficult maneuver in the literature, you have to do it right then and there. There's no setting it up in the crowd, So I respect that about those guys, But so that's what happened with that. I still took the lessons though, and I still, kept the technique up and kept working on those things, and I still do. He was a great teacher. But that's when that's when the road had a fork in it when I was about 13. And then I got into contact with Wynton Marsalis. He came through Camden at the waterfront, and he was dressed real slick. And my teacher was an older fella, so I was around a lot of the older jazz players in Philly. And there were some young bucks, but I was kind of the Camden kids, so they kind of ostracized, they kind of didn't really have too much time for me. But when Wynton came around, I got to see a person who was a younger guy, and he was a person of my same ethnicity and culture, so there was no miscommunication too much there, very little. He was dressed real slick though, and this is when I'm coming into my high school years, and I'm starting trying to look cool and stuff, and girls aren't so icky anymore, and stuff like that. And so this guy comes in, he's got his slick suit on, and he's got his horn, and he can play, and he's got a vibe, he's got he's into what he does, and there's beautiful young ladies that I see all of a sudden, like, wow, I didn't, but they seem like nice girls, and like all these type of things are the thoughts that were going through my head when I saw that picture, and I was like, wow, he's a jazz guy. It's like, wow, New York and all that thing. And I was so infatuated with him and that kind of image that I allowed that to kind of lull me into a false sense of security. And when I finally met him, the first time I met him, I said some kind of kid thing. It was funny. There was a trailer that he was in backstage, and the security guard wouldn't let me in, but he and all of his buddies were in there. But for some reason, I'll never know why, but for some reason, I remember I was standing right there, and the security guard wouldn't let me, so I was just this kid with my little baseball hat on and a sweatshirt on. And then I saw the door shutter, and then it opened a little bit, and he was sticking his head out a little bit. And he said, "Hey man, let the little fella in." And I don't know how he knew I was out there. I don't know what that was all about, but that's how it happened. And so I went on up in there, and these guys were, talking up a storm, cursing up a storm, just being rowdy. He was like early 20s at this time, so he was rowdy. And they were talking about some jazz artists, who they like, some stuff. And so then I said, well, I like, and I don't want to say the jazz. I said, there's a particular jazz artist who's into a lot of fusion. And I said, well, I like blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, first of all, didn't nobody ask you what you like, and don't nobody give a, I got cursed out. And I'd never been cursed out by men before, and it kind of, they were hitting me with like some other stuff, so it kind of touched me like, whoa, like I wasn't used to that. It was like a locker room, and I had built them up so high, and it wasn't till, recently that I finally got that part together, like got over that. Because I've lived, the jazz thing. I've been around all those things, and I see it for what it is. And so now it's like finally free from worrying about what he thinks, but also respecting him and respecting myself too. It's a lot of different things, but those are some of the main moments of my first introductions into jazz. And how I got so into it. I really respected him. He was classical virtuoso, and so I wanted to be like that. I thought, wow, that's a great thing to be like. From there, I got a full scholarship to Manhattan School of Music, and so I went there for 4 years, and I made a lot of connections in New York, and I was aggressively seeking the best that I could get, and practicing, and got hooked up with Cassandra Wilson, big singer. Went to Australia, New Zealand, all over Europe. Then I was good enough to be in Wynton's band, a big band. So then I went to Russia, Moscow, Poland, all over France, London, Puerto Rico. That's where I wrote that song, Puerto Rico, from when I was on tour with him, doing Argentina, Brazil. And then 3 days later, I was walking down the street in Greenwich Village, and I looked into the Downbeat magazine. Now there's this competition called the Thelonious Monk International Piano Competition. First place, 20 grand. And I had been in that competition a long time ago when I was 16. But I only made the semifinals. That competition happens once every for piano it happens like once every 5 or 7 years. So if you miss it one time, you got to wait 5 or 7 years. But I had forgotten about it. And it turns out that was the year that it had come back around. And when I saw that in the first place was 20 grand, and I had just turned down 30 grand, and then I looked up into the sky, and I'm like, there was no Cecil B. DeMille's, no lightning bolt. It was just a naked blue sky. But there was something that happened, and it was like, okay, yeah, you take a step towards me, I'll take a step towards you. Okay, now stop crying, stop tripping, go practice. Come on, So I went and practiced. 6 months later, sent the tape in, got in, made it in, won. First place. Boom, from there, that was in 99. From there, off of that, I got the gig with Elvin Jones. Now, Elvin Jones is a living legend. He's one of the greatest musicians in the history of the universe. He played with John Coltrane. He was he's the last great innovator of jazz music. And I had always wanted to play with him, but things were always in the way. He never knew me. I even met him one time, but nobody gave me an entree. And I wanted to say, so bad, my style is built around you, man. But I had no entree. He didn't know me. But a bass player friend of mine happened to be in his band at that time when all this went down. And another Thelonious Monk winner for trumpet was in the band at the same time. So the reason I got the gig was because it made good political sense to have two Monk winners in the band. And then when I finally got in the band, I was able to express to him through the music, man, I've been waiting all this time, to play with you. And, we had like it was like grandfather and son. It was just like two peas in a pot. Every day I would interview him. Like I'm getting interviewed, I interview him and ask him, well, how do you think about this? Well, what about when this happens? Every day. And I would go practice all day and then go do the gig with him and make some more mistakes and then say, well, Mr. Jones, this day. He said, well, Eric, first of all, you have to, you're an artist. And it's a matter of, And it was just great. It was just some real apprentice. I had my apprenticeship, it was some real serious stuff. And then I stayed with that band 2 years, and I went out with Roy Hargrove, who was a young guy. That was my first time being in a band with people who were about my peers. I was 30 there, like 32, 33, 34, 35. And so he would play like funk and get the audience into it. And I stayed with that band about 3 months, but I learned a lot, and he and I, we had a nice relationship. And so now I'm just flying on my own with all that experience that I've gotten. Interestingly enough, I just completed Wynton's first record for Blue Note. So, pretty soon that'll be coming out, maybe around the same time as this. And, that was some really hip stuff. So it's like a full circle.
Yeah.
And
it's cool how it all comes back together.
It's amazing, It's really amazing. And as you see, it took every day of every moment of practicing just to get like that Cherokee, I did all those takes even to the last minute today, the last bit, and finally that was the one that I liked, So it's since 2 till now, it took every bit of that, every tear, every smile, everything to get to that. So yeah,